What is Dollar Gujarati?
How do Gujaratis do business?
What kind of businesses can you do in America?
How can you grow your business?
How do you get your first customer?
How can you raise funding?
When should you be frugal?
Can you start a business as an immigrant?
Why is sales important?
Where are all the investors?
Which is the correct model for your startup?
Find these answers and more in Season 2 of Dollar Gujarati.
Season 1 was all about the stories of successful Gujarati entrepreneurs in America. Season 2 is about getting actionable tips from young Gujarati startup founders. Every week, we dive deep into solving one business challenge in a TED Talk style. Let's dive into today's episode.
Hi guys, welcome back. We're back with Rahim and learning with YC. Rahim, as you know, was an entrepreneur since the age of 15, and now he's running SV Academy, which is your gateway into the tech world if you don't know coding. So Rahim, what are you going to teach us today?
Well, let's talk about sales. I feel like as entrepreneurs all around, that's the most important skill set that many of us don't really think about a lot. It's the most important skill set you can have as an entrepreneur. You can't raise money, can't recruit talent, and you cannot sell software if you don't know how to sell.
Yeah, that's true. I think a lot of engineers, they tend to over focus on building the product without testing it against their customers or trying to sell it. And so I think this will be a great learning experience for all the guys who are, who've just started out their companies and are learning how to sell.
All right, great. Let's do it. Listen, I can probably pack all 5 points into 1 point. And that 1 point is that sales starts with the audience in mind. It starts with the customer in mind. It feels very straightforward. We talk about this a lot, but having trained so many people to sell software, I can tell you it's like straightforward, but it's not simple, and it's also non-obvious. One of the biggest lessons I learned while I was at Oracle, and by the way, I was there for almost 3 years, and that was a lot longer than I expected to stay post acquisition. And I stayed there because Oracle is world-class at sales. And as you know, I haven't really done a lot of formal education. So getting paid to learn at Oracle was like a great deal for me. And I know this community will appreciate that. And so what I learned while I was at Oracle was that, ultimately it's not about like selling features, right? So for the longest time, having sort of more of a product engineering mindset, I thought about, okay, well, how to build the very best mousetrap, and then how to, when I'm speaking to customers, how can I really like help them understand how great this software is and all the bells and whistles and why we design things in certain ways. And there's a pride of ownership that you have in what you've built. And when I got to Oracle, what I realized was that what's most important actually is helping your customer become a hero and become, what I mean by that is becoming a hero in their organization, on their team, and specifically to their boss. And what does that mean? It means that when that person that you are prospecting is sitting down with their boss to do a quarterly review, is the fact that they bought software from you, that the fact that you built this relationship with them, a driving factor in their promotion, in their review. Because if it is, that means that you help them get a pay raise. With sales, you're interfacing with another human. It's another human heartbeat. That heartbeat has thoughts and feelings and dreams and aspirations and desires and fears.
Awesome. That's a great thought, to think of sales as a human problem and not as a machine problem. So let's jump right into it. So I have an educational product which I am selling to tier 2, tier 3 universities in the US.
Okay.
In the time of Corona.
Oh boy.
So what are the 1 or 2 things which would be part of your sales pitch?
Well, the beauty of enterprise sales is that these are, when we talk about the human, like it's human centered, right? And there's sort of the internal human algorithm within that person. Enterprises are just collections of a lot of humans. And I think the starting place is to really appreciate that when you're approaching a university, it's it's not like a monolith. It is a collection of human beings. And the first place to start for me is always to try to understand the organizational mapping of that enterprise, and trying to understand what are the various groups, the relationships with the groups, who has what problem, which ones are decision makers, which ones are influencers, which ones have budget, which ones don't have budget, who ultimately do these groups report into, who is at the very top. And once you kind of do that mapping, it's a lot easier to understand your starting point, right? Which is then the second point, which is, okay, you've done the mapping now, where do you start? So for me, my very best way to start is at the very, very top. It sounds audacious and maybe unrealistic, but that's only because you haven't tried it yet. We often undervalue our abilities, and we forget that, again, even the person at the very top is a human being in the end of the day. What I typically do is I just reach directly out to that person. And in this case, it would be, the president of the university. And I would reach out to them with as we train people to do at SV Academy, I would reach out with a very personalized email or phone call, probably both. And there's a 20-25% chance that without any warm introduction, just kind of completely cold, that you'll be able to reach this person. And it may not be that they're saying, oh, I'll take a meeting with you. It may mean that they'll forward your email to somebody else. But for example, I don't have a formal undergraduate degree, but I do have a couple of years of schooling in business. And the way I was able to get into that program was reaching out directly to the dean of the business program, who was a very senior person, sits on the board of General Motors, big time CEO before she got into academia. And it just happened to work. And had I not done my cold outreach, I may not be sitting here today, right? And then I think the third piece is then really understanding like how to qualify well. So often what we try to do is we try to sell, but we don't qualify, which I think of as buying. And what I mean by that is, like, a lot of people in the these people that you might sort of reach out to and have meetings with, even if it's within the right organization, like there might not be the right person, and you're not necessarily going to get it right on the first try. So in order not to waste your time or theirs, it's really important to understand what actually like disqualifies someone from being a great prospect versus what qualifies them. Because you'll always look for reasons to qualify them in, but we often don't think about what qualifies people out. And a big one is willingness to pay, which is related to budget. Another big one is authority. Another big one is need. Do they actually have a need, right? And then is there some kind of time pressure and urgency? And actually what I just laid out for you is BANT, which is a popular sales methodology that I didn't make up, but I have adopted, and we teach our students. And as you can see, it's now in my consciousness. And I think about it every time I go and sell software.
Awesome. Second product is a consumer product. It's devices for home automation. So something like Nest, what Google's Nest does.
Yeah.
But you're in the customer's home. The person's having a renovation, and you're pitching to them home automation. Your product is new. It's cheaper. It's controlled by an app. It's controlled by voice assistants. So what's your pitch to the customer there?
Well, I think for a direct-to-consumer product, it's essentially the same frameworks that you use selling to an enterprise. It's just, number one, you are thinking about high volume, right? And number two, the budget is probably available because we're talking about let's call it $100 product, not $100,000 product. So that budget is probably available, but the amount of competition or substitutes is probably quite significant. And a substitute could be not doing anything. And that's the typical, that for something like home automation, it's like I think about the difference between how my dad would think about this versus the way I would think about it myself, right? Which leads me to an important point that is universal about sales, but we'll use it in the context of direct to consumer, which is really understanding the personas. And so I think, when you're thinking about the personas, I think while selling into the enterprise can be a little bit more challenging because there's a lot of nuances in the enterprise and you may not know all the different roles within this industry until you get some kind of specialization selling into higher ed in the last example, direct to consumer is going to feel a lot more familiar to you. And I think the hard part is pushing against that and actually having some detachment and reminding yourself that you may have some familiarity, but only within the domains of a very narrow segment of the market. And in reality, there are many different segments with many different personas, and how you prioritize your messaging and your approach is going to depend very, very much on where you land on that definition. So in this case, the way I would think about it is just thinking about my dad, for example, he can spend the money on it. I mean, he does live in a place. He has lights and he has other devices. He has a phone. He even has someone like me who can be like an influencer in decisions like this. But I think the inertia to overcome that would be necessary would just kind of be make kind of focusing on his segment, kind of generally speaking, not valuable. What I would very much start though with is like try to define my audience as narrowly as possible. And I might even start with like, who are the 20 people I know who like look exactly like this, right? And try to define it very, very narrowly. Like, for example, this podcast is a great example of it, right? Like the reason why I came on this podcast is because it's called Dollar Gujarati. I love dollars and I love Gujaratis. So I'm absolutely here. If it was something else, I don't know if I would be here, right? Like, so you want to define the audience very, very narrowly. You want to see if you can get to a threshold of, let's say, 20 people you think you could, or within one degree, you could reach out to. And then what I do is like, I would try with surveys as much as possible. And I would, again, try to validate my assumptions as much as possible, right? Like, maybe I could tell you the whole playbook about how to go and do this, but you can read that. Anyone can read that in places, lots smarter people than me. But maybe the best thing I can offer is when I've made mistakes, and where I've made mistakes is where I've presumed that I made a lot of assumptions about the audience in terms of its size and its needs and how to access them, because it's a projection about my own feelings. And I am kind of, through confirmation bias, predisposed to loving my idea, only to find out that like no one really cares about this. And if it's a direct to consumer business, you have to have a lot of volume in order to make it work. So my friend, for example, was a co-founder of Dropcam, which ultimately became Nest, right? And I remember like the way he kind of hacked this was they knew already there was a significant market for like remote kind of surveillance, let's call it. Like the first ideas were like small business owners. And actually it was their family member again, which is like a lot of B2C ideas start off with like the family member of his partner, like his partner's father, his co-founder's partner was trying to set up a camera, a Logitech camera, I think it was, and like just fumbled with the setup and had to call my friend's my friend's co-founder, and like have him walk through all the steps, and it like was just a nightmare. So I think they were thinking like, there's already a large market for this, so we've kind of hacked that part of it. We know there's an audience, but the issue is actually in the onboarding. It's like in the last mile, how do you activate this? And if you can make the activation easier, that actually might create more energy on the demand side, because then more people actually might be interested in buying these cameras and switching if they knew it was just like a one-click setup. And then they just focus very specifically on, again, a narrow segment, like these small business owners who already had some surveillance going, and then just a very, very specific part of the workflow that they wanted to automate, which was like out of the box experience. And then from there, they just kind of built it out, did remote streaming and all that kind of stuff that you see today, and moved into other segments. And then, we're of course like very, very successful with it.
Awesome. Yeah, these were great insights. Both of these startups are actually run by a couple of my friends. So I'm sure
nice.
that I will be sharing this with them, and I'm sure it is going to be really helpful to them. I think we're out of time for today, but thank you for coming on our show and sharing your time with us and your knowledge with us.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for inviting me. And then hopefully I can come back and answer more questions, and yeah, happy to. Really enjoyed this, and hopefully it's valuable to everyone.
All right.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you so much.